So hello there and welcome back to a brand new episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast, the show where we talk all of the latest news, gossip and events in the world of Formula 1, and we relay that back to you for your listening or viewing pleasure, depending of course on which platform you choose to follow us on. And guys, we've just had the Easter break, the first interlull of the season, if you like, and I hope that you are all doing very, very well. As I said before, the sun is shining, the weather is warming up, at least in the UK. Everything around the world seems to be a little bit chipper, respectively, of course, and hopefully wherever you are around the world, we hope that you are okay as well. But we're back to talk about Formula 1, and this weekend is the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix, otherwise known as the Imola Grand Prix, and even to some of you veteran fans, still might call it the San Marino Grand Prix. All of those are absolutely acceptable, regardless of the hashtag that F1 decides to go with this weekend. But nonetheless, we are going to be talking about that this weekend. And to go through all of that, I've got my DNF1 team with me for the first time since, I believe, the Saudi Arabian preview. I think it was that long ago. So
that's about right.
It does, yeah. It feels like such a long time ago. But nonetheless, we're all back together, guys, all looking smart in the apparel, including Lee this time. So, Lee, how does it look? Looking good? And how does it feel?
Yeah, I'm very pleased to now have my nice shirt. For those watching on YouTube, I just showed the logo, but obviously on the podcast, you're not going to be able to see that. But no, it's great to be. Well, I was officially in with the team, but actually had the same kit. It's it fits comfortably, and I'm just ready to go for this weekend.
Lovely.
See how the first sprint goes.
Hashtag squad goals indeed. But of course, for those of you wondering who's joining me on this pod, without any other further introduction, I've got Courtney Pine and Lee Wallington. The DNF1 trio is complete. Courtney, going to come to you quickly. How are you doing? All good?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Yeah, it feels like it's been a while. You're right, since we've had the three of us on at the same time, and I'm very much looking forward to this weekend. I really do love this circuit, and if we carry on the way we are with the amount of overtaking we've seen, I would say that this could be one of my top three circuits.
Yeah, if for a circuit that's usually quite small and quite narrow and used to be quite a difficult place to overtake, we have had quite a lot of action in the last few years that F1 has been there following its return to the calendar when the pandemic was first around, and obviously Imola has made itself a regular fixture on the calendar since. But look, let's get into the episode, guys, as everyone's looking smart, squad goals, and don't forget, guys, of course, if you are enjoying what we do, make sure to give us a like, subscribe to the channel, follow us on the podcasting platforms, give us a nice 5-star review, all of that and the above. We'd really, really appreciate that. And of course, we have been rather busy. Whilst the three of us have not been together for a little while, we've been recording plenty of content for you, the last of which was a very good chat with the host of Missed Apex podcast, Richard Spanners Ready. I really enjoyed that. And I hope you guys, if you haven't already checked it out, definitely check that out. I'll leave a card in there for those of you that are watching this on YouTube to check this out after the episode. But guys, Imola Grand Prix, Emilia Romagna Grand Prix, San Marino Grand Prix, whatever you want to call it, it's thick and fast and coming this weekend. And I want to start with the sprint race, because this is the first time this season we're going to be having the sprint weekend. Obviously, they're familiar with the format from what we got last season, and F1 obviously want to push with it for this season, and it was something that for a while we weren't sure if we were actually going to get it, because there was a bit of a stalemate owing to the cost cap restrictions, and there wanted to be a bit of leeway with the teams. Eventually, we ended up getting sprint races for this season, and the first of which is going to be at this weekend's Grand Prix. So, first of all, guys, are we looking forward to the first sprint race of the 2022 season? Courtney, what are your thoughts on the sprint weekend?
I'm starting to warm to the sprint races compared to the last time we discussed it. I think we discussed it at some point last season. It all depends. I said last season, if we get the amount of overtaking that we want, then I feel like the sprint races are more likely to be a success. And so far, so good. I'm hoping I don't jinx it. I'm hoping we get to see plenty of action during the sprint race, because at the end of the day, that's what we want to be seeing. Plenty of head-to-head battles. But I still stand by my original point I made last year, and it is that I think that we should be sticking with the sprint races only at certain venues, because at places like Monaco, it's pointless, because you're not going to have any pit stops. So even at Monaco, I think the one, apart from maybe changeable conditions, the only way you get any kind of racing or drama is through strategy, whether it be through a slow pit stop or whatnot. That's the only bit of drama that you get during the Monaco Grand Prix. So it just wouldn't work in a place like Monaco. So I think they should stick at having it at several venues to start with, and then if it proves to be a success, just start adding it slowly, because I do like the old-fashioned format, but hopefully some of the subtle changes they're bringing in this year might help me walk to it even more.
I mean, could you imagine a sprint race at Monaco? I mean, they've been quite interested in F2 and F3 in recent years, and for obvious reasons, but even then, it was almost a case of if your qualifying position was favourable, there's always going to be a good chance that you're going to win. It was almost the same thing as just a normal race, just a third race distance. Obviously, we should remind those of you that are new to sprint races in Formula One, obviously that was introduced last season. The format is pretty much the same with a few minor details that are different. First of which, of course, the award for pole position. That will now go to whoever qualifies on pole during sprint qualifying rather than the actual sprint race itself. Although I'm not sure if F1 are calling it a sprint race or if they're still going with calling it a sprint, for lack of a better way of putting it. We've got rid of the old Speed King award.
Good. Probably
one of those awards that you might see pop up on a trivia question one day saying who... I was trying to think who was known as the F1 Speed King in 2021, which I think Valtteri Bottas got 2 of those. Did he not? I'd have to try and look back. I think it was didn't Lewis get one at Silverstone and then Valtteri got the other 2?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a nice little feather in Valtteri's cap there. You know, if ever get a trivia question, who wants to be a millionaire or something like that, saying who was F1's Speed King, or who was the most common man as speaking, or something like that, then yeah, Valtteri Bottas will be your guy. But we've done with that. It's just going to be pole position awarded in qualifying, which I think makes a lot of sense. It makes things a lot more simple and straightforward. And of course, the point structure has changed a bit as well. Instead of having 3-point scorers for the top 3 finishers, who were getting 3 points for first, 2 for second, and 1 for third, we're now going to get 8 points finishers. So the top 8 finishers will score points in the sprint race. And of course, as a result of all that, they will all take their positions for the race depending on where they finish in that sprint, and it will be 8 points to the winner, going all the way down to 8th place that gets 1 point. So a lot to take in, but it will make a lot of sense, of course, when we see it this weekend. Lee, what are your thoughts on the F1 sprint returning for 2022? Do you think that this is one of those experiments that F1 are just trying to keep on pushing and hope that it sticks, or do you feel that perhaps these changes that they are proposing, and a few changes to the venues, mind you, with the exception of Brazil, might breathe new life into this series, which right now, I feel like it's 50-50 whether or not that it's going to be successful or not?
Now, well, I'm going to start with that. I completely think it's Formula One pushing this, and we'll keep pushing it until the fans and the sport accept it, because this is where they want to go. That I don't think is debatable. That's what's going to happen. However, I am interested to see how this weekend goes, just as the sheer amount of overtaking we've had in the races itself. So I'm interested to see how it goes, as I said. But I think one of the big criticisms I had last year was about the rewarding itself didn't encourage racing, especially for the midfield teams. And providing the top 8 point scorers now get points, it encourages the midfield to hopefully not hold station, go and attack a little bit. It also makes the risk-reward situation a bit greater. I mean, 8 points, all right, may not sound a lot, but if you also get a DNF like a Red Bull or a Toro Rosso, AlphaTauri, get the team name right, all of a sudden we have some Red Bull powertrain issues again in a sprint. That's it. You lose a significant amount of points. Where last year it would have been 3 points. Oh, 3 points. Or that's doesn't sound that bad. But 8, you start to give away big points in the championship if you get a DNF. That is, I think, something also to take into consideration.
It certainly has the potential to have more of an impact on the championship this season than last year's system did. I mean, for example, 8 points swing one way or the other would have been enough to change the result of the World Championship last season. So the sprint, whilst when it was introduced, they obviously wanted to avoid a scenario like that, it very much has more of a potential for that to be the case. And as I said, I'm not a big fan of this sprint either. Again, maybe this comes from a bit of a boomer traditionalist perspective that I may have, and I totally get that. This is probably more for a crowd of fans that don't want to sit down and watch an F1 race for 2 hours or however long it is. They want to see something a bit more condensed, and I get that. And Yeah, I suppose it's better to watch qualifying on a Friday than some practice and then have another race on the Saturday to look forward to. I mean, I'm all for it. But I suppose what you've been saying, Lee, is that F1 just don't seem to be taking on the feedback that the fans have been giving them, and they're just trying to push through with this, and hopefully it just proves to be successful despite itself. And look, this isn't new. F1 have been doing this for so many years. We can look over all of the qualifying formats that we've seen up until we've got to this point, and even then they tried to change that. I mean, who remembers the aggregate qualifying back in the early 2000s? I thought, what was it, 2005 they did that? Where you just have qualifying on a Saturday and then on a Sunday morning. You're thinking, well, who's going to turn up on a Sunday morning to watch the second leg of qualifying? It was just ridiculous. But look, F1's going to do it, and F1's certainly going to try. We also asked you guys on Twitter, on the DNF1 page, what your thoughts were for the sprint. Were you looking forward to it this year? And do you think F1 should push on with it in 2023, regardless of what happens this season? And surprisingly, it was actually closer than I thought. 57% of you certainly agreed with me that they weren't fans of the sprint format, but 43% of you were. So, I mean, it's a very small pool of people, limited to our followers, but if that is a more accurate reflection of what the fan base believes, that's certainly going to be positive for F1, because that's enough for them to work with to try and tweak this format a little bit more, maybe introduce a few more races. I know they were talking at potentially having 6 races. It's only going to be 3 this year. So there does seem to be some scope for fans wanting this sprint series, but of course we'll just have to wait and see how that all pans out. And Courtney, seeing as we're going into the first sprint weekend, and it's at Imola, a track historically, as we said, has produced some entertaining racing, although it's not the easiest track in the world to overtake. Bear in mind, we're only going to have one DRS zone as well, down the back straight. Are you expecting a lot of overtaking in this sprint race, or do you feel that it could become, as it was often last year, with the exception of Lewis Hamilton in Brazil and Alonso, because Alonso was Alonso, a bit of a procession where everyone just sort of follows suit after the first few laps?
I'm cautiously optimistic. I am. I second what Lee said. I'm hoping that the fact that we're rewarding points further down the grid will give the midfield teams an incentive to race against each other. And this season, we're seeing quite a bunched up grid. So these points could make more of a difference compared to last season. And, and particularly with, wet conditions being put out, could come into the equation this weekend. I think if there's rain forecast for the Sunday, for example, you want to take your opportunity and get as many points as you can, because we all know that with wet races, anything can happen. So I just think there will be an incentive. I also think there will be an incentive for a team like Williams that have started on the back foot. Having an opportunity to score points. If a Red Bull, for example, was to break down, there is an opportunity for teams to score more points. And sometimes we forget. Sometimes we get so wrapped up in the drivers' championship that sometimes we forget how important these points are for the teams in terms of the funding they get, the prize money they get at the end of the season. So these sprint races could be so important for a team like Williams coming into the season.
Well, this is the thing. Kevin Magnussen was asked about this, and he felt that the sprint series could be good for Haas this season because it's an opportunity for them to try and get some points, which means more prize money for these teams. A team like Haas, it could be really valuable to them. Lee, I'm going to put this question to you as well, because the new point system is probably the one that could make or break this series, in my opinion, in terms of what the drivers decide to do. Because last season, it was quite obvious that unless you were in a Red Bull or a Mercedes, there was no point trying to fight and battle. You might as well just see where you are after a few laps, and if you're in your positions and you set the way the cars followed each other, you're better off just trying to have in what you hold and then worry about Sunday. This season, it might be a bit different. We've got more points available, which means there's more opportunities. As Courtney mentioned, the midfield runners and the midfield pack is extremely tight this season. With the exception of Alpine, we've not really had a consistent car that has stood strong in the midfield at all 3 races this season. So do you think that's going to create more racing in the sprint races in the midfield, which I imagine will be the desired effect? Or do you feel that there is a risk now that more of the leading cars may decide to just have what they hold, and we may only be restricted to a cluster of cars, say 3 or 4 at the most, that will actually try and battle in the sprint race?
I don't think the leading cars will be in a holding position. Emilia, I think the Ferraris will quite happily hold position. But I think it's even if you say on a estimated scenario, Lewis and George are going to be 5th and 6th in going into the sprint qualifying, and you'll get Max in there with the Ferraris. Max doesn't hold position. So even if you go over the radio, go, Max, we're happy with this whole position, you will be throwing down the radio and he'll go for it because he sees a gap. He doesn't hold, so he will. The question for me is: will Max Bonza, if he's not on pole position coming, would he try and just throw one into the corner? Will he take out Carlos? Will he take out Charles?
Well, he's 46
he's had 2
points
DNFs.
Behind. Yeah, he's
behind.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing.
Yeah, so he could get desperate if he needs to try and claw back points as soon as he can.
There was points last year where I felt he got desperate against the fight against Lewis, and he had to just chuck it in there. Same as Lewis got desperate against Max, and he had to chuck it in there. We're in the 4th race of the season. Max is already going to be desperate to get those points back. So I fully expect him to go in for those 8 points, regardless of the situation. But on the midfield aspects, in Australia, McLaren, they said it was track specific, their renaissance back into some good point scoring. But if that carries over to this circuit and Haas falls down like it was in Australia, that's an opportunity for a midfield team to grab back some points they lost from having McLaren, their brake issues in the warmer climate. So they'll be grabbing those points to pull themselves back out of the not they're in the doldrums and the constructors at the moment, but to recover those lost points. And that applies to many other teams that started difficulty at the beginning of the season in the Middle East. So it's there's everything to go for, in my opinion.
At the risk of chucking in another caveat, which adds fuel to the fire for a sprint race to be successful, which is kind of against what I feel with these sprint races, is the fact that we are going to get variable weather conditions. Most notably, from what I've seen in the latest forecast, that we're going to get rain on Friday, we're going to get rain on Sunday, but nothing on the Saturday. So does that mean that there could potentially be a risk now, assuming that parc fermé conditions continue for Friday going into Sunday, that we may see someone try and take a risk and run a dry setup or a drier setup on Friday, which gives them a lower qualifying position, but will make them annoyingly fast compared to the competition on the Saturday sprint race, which will allow them to buy some positions. Of course, it might bite them in the arse on Sunday, but say, for example, you get, I don't know, a Kevin Magnussen or a Valtteri Bottas or perhaps an Alfa or a Pierre Gasly decide, you know what, the best we're going to hope for this weekend, or maybe Gasly might be a good example on this. The best you can hope for is a P9 or P10 on raw pace. Maybe he takes the gamble, and he's very, very good around Imola. He's been very good the last couple of years for AlphaTauri anyway. He may decide to take the gamble and go with a dry setup on Friday, and then he's like lightning on the Saturday. May even get on the podium in the sprint and then take the pain on Sunday. But if it's a difficult track to pass on or something happens, he might be able to mitigate that. So I almost feel that there's an opportunity there for someone if the weather conditions do go the way that it seems that they may go. Corny, what do you think? Do you think there's someone in that pack that might take that risk? And is that person also Fernando Alonso?
Oh, don't rule it out. It's with the wet conditions, as I said earlier on, with the wet conditions, you are going to see teams taking a chance because you really don't know what's going to come next. There are so many things that can go wrong, and that's why we love wet races. Wet races take F1 races, the enjoyment scale, to a whole new level. That's why I had one point. You had Bernie Ecclestone wanted to put sprinklers across the track to create a artificial wet surface, because we all know that the wet weather. So you think about some of our favourite all-time races, I'd say the majority of them have been wet races. So yeah, we could be seeing some teams take a chance. We've seen the chaos that happens when there's changeable conditions. Some teams stay out, some teams don't, for example. In. That's a prime example of it. Right, we've seen it. So it could well be an example of that. But I'd also like to raise another point. He's talking about the point scoring system and about that 1 point can make a difference. Look how much of a difference that extra point for the fastest lap has made. Last season, we saw Red Bull and Mercedes using Perez and Bottas as a way of taking the fastest lap away from Max or Lewis, respectively. So that could be another thing, particularly maybe in future seasons when we have closer championship battles. The point scoring system in sprint races will be as important as ever.
Do we get a fastest lap point for a sprint race? I don't know if we do.
We don't.
No,
We don't.
not
I'm
yet.
saying
Not
last
yet, at
season.
least.
But that extra point, that extra point you could get from a sprint race,
Mm.
we're saying, will they care? Will they not? Well, history shows that they do care about that extra point. Every single point matters,
Well,
particularly if you're in the first championship battle.
at least Charles Leclerc does, because I think he's got all 3 fastest laps so far this season. So we'll have to wait and see if someone try. It's not like they don't try. I mean, Lando certainly tried at Melbourne, and Leclerc pushed. And if he didn't push on that final lap, he wouldn't have got it at Melbourne. So yeah, I totally agree with you. There is a lot of onus on every single point this season, and it's great to see. And hopefully, maybe that will translate into something more exciting in the sprint series. I certainly hope it works. We don't want it to fail. We're not fans of it. But we don't want it to fail. And if F1 are going to push with it, it might as well be successful, and they might as well prove us wrong. I mean, they're the ones getting paid the mega bucks to be in those positions. We're just fans at the end of the day, talking about it on your favorite independent podcast. For those of you listening, but look, biases aside, the weather is going to be important, and at the risk of trying to sound a little bit arrogant about this, because I'm going to anyway, we might get wet running in this sprint race, and that's going to introduce a new variable to these new cars, because we've not seen them perform in the wet conditions yet. And from memory, last season, when they did the tyre test, there was only 2 days where there's actual natural wet weather running, and one team ran the wet tyres on those days. And have a guess which one that was.
I'm deliberately leaving you hanging here.
Yeah, no prizes for guessing, guys. That was Ferrari that did wet weather running on those days, and that was planned. It wasn't, one of those where they thought, oh, we're definitely gonna. That was just what they were doing. They were the ones that did the most wet running on these tyres during the test. So again, it's another advantage potentially for them that they've got more experience. But again, we'll just have to wait and see. Look, let's move on to the main event, and guys, let us know about your thoughts on the sprint series and what you're going to think for this season, what you're expecting in the sprint race and the new system. Do you think that will work? Just let us know in the comments below. Let's talk about the main race. Seeing as we're talking about Ferrari at the moment, starting off brilliantly strong, almost perfect start to the season for Charles Leclerc, and given for what we've seen so far this season, is Charles Leclerc the favourite to win for Ferrari on home soil? Courtney, what do you think?
100%. I think it's a big weekend for Ferrari. I think this is the weekend where Ferrari could make a real statement of intent. We're going into the European part of the season now. This is the part of the season where if you're behind, you really need to start getting your act together, because the races start coming thick and fast. And that's why there's usually traditionally a raft of upgrades. Not sure if we're going to be seeing that this weekend given the circumstances. But this is when the teams really need to start getting their act together. And if Ferrari put a dominant performance, let's be honest, it is one of their home Grand Prix. If they put in a dominant performance at Imola, that's going to be a real confidence boost, not only for the team, but for their fans as well, because there is still a lot of cautious optimism within the Ferrari fan base. Can you blame them? Probably not after the last 15 years. But if they put in a dominant performance here, and let's say Red Bull continue to have their reliability issues, because the only team that, at this stage, the only team that is a threat to Ferrari on raw pace are Red Bull. So if we see a continuation of the trend that we've been seeing in those first 3 races, there's going to be absolute pandemonium at Ferrari for the right reasons.
And you're absolutely right to point out the fact that Red Bull are the only realistic competition right now. I believe Mark Hughes for the race did a average qualifying performance to the fastest car and for the first 3 races, and I think Red Bull were just a tenth shy of Ferrari, which is actually still pretty good, pretty close. But then the next fastest were Mercedes, who were 8 tenths down. So it just shows that at the moment the lack of competition at the front, relatively speaking, for qualifying. But you're absolutely right, Courtney. This is a great opportunity for Ferrari to get their first win on home soil since Charles Leclerc won the Italian Grand Prix in 2019. And it's also going to be in front of a home crowd as well, given that fans are going to be able to attend this race. They haven't been able to come to the last 2 races, so this is certainly a great opportunity for a huge homecoming for Ferrari on home soil. Of course, not the local team, that'll be AlphaTauri, but it's still Italy, it's still going to be Ferrari country. So this is a great opportunity for Ferrari to really lay down a proper marker at the first European race of the season. Upgrades, of course, there's been a lot of talk whether or not Ferrari were going to put that new floor that they were testing at Melbourne on this car. Mattia Binotto said they're not going to be doing that. They're going to hold that back because of the potential changes in weather this weekend. So obviously that's not going to help them correlate the data that they've obviously collated so far. And I think it's a sensible idea, because if the car is efficient and the car is quick, as it's proven to be, there's no need to rush upgrades on the car, especially when you're probably not going to get the full benefit of it given the changeable conditions. If it was a dry race, I'm pretty sure Ferrari would try again and see what happens. But in a cost cap era, you really can't make those risks, especially if one of them bins it like Carlos Sainz did at Melbourne and damages the car. Lee, I want to talk about Carlos Sainz, because I think we can talk about Charles Leclerc to the cows come home, but it's nothing than what we've already said already, and I think we can all agree that he's probably the favourite this weekend for Ferrari, looking so good. But Carlos Sainz, there's now a newfound pressure on him that he probably may have anticipated would come his way this season, but I don't think he expected it to be so soon. Combined with the fact now that there's been rumours going over the latest information on his new contract negotiations with Ferrari, to the point where they may have stalled over the length of the contract, being the stalemate at the moment between the two parties, and of course the disappointing weekend he had last time out in Melbourne. What are your thoughts on Carlos Sainz? Is it critical that he responds to that as soon as possible and puts together a similar performance to what he did in Bahrain and Saudi, or perhaps something even more, to the point where he may have to try and win this Grand Prix just to try and convince Ferrari that he's not going to be the number 2 driver this season?
Well, you know the saying in Formula One is you're only as good as your last race. And right now, I think that, well, obviously applies to every driver, but right now it applies probably to Carlos more than ever in his career. Carlos needs to win this race. He needs to get pole position. He needs to get, whether you call it sprint winner, whatever official title that's awarded. Carlos needs to get all those points he can to A, claw him back in the championship, B, put him in a better contract position with Ferrari, and C, make that point of, we discussed previously, of Ferrari throwing their weight behind Charles for the title. He needs to prove to Ferrari they don't throw the weight behind Charles just yet. So he needs to win on all those counts. If he will, is obviously a different matter, and we'll have to wait and see. But he will be in there full guns going. He's annoyed at himself about the failure of what happened in the last few races, because some of it's not been his fault, some of it has been messy driving. So there's a lot that's gone on, and he's just going to go out there and a point to prove.
Yeah, I hope he does, for his sake. I mean, a lot went wrong from at Melbourne. Qualifying, obviously, if it wasn't for Fernando Alonso crashing in the final sector and ruining his lap. Incidentally, they found the part that was responsible for that hydraulics issue he had, and that was an oil seal, which cost $1.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty much one of the most insignificant things that you could think of that was responsible for the issue, and it prevented Fernando from a potential front row, and also prevented Carlos Sainz from a solid qualifying and race position as well, depending on what would have happened in that race. But Courtney, similar question to you on Carlos Sainz. As we said already, it felt like, whilst things were unfortunate for Carlos in qualifying, it was just, one of those things where it just didn't go right for him. It felt like he was trying to overdrive the car to sort of get back and panic a little bit. Are we expecting a more measured Carlos Sainz this weekend, or do you feel that there's the potential that with everything going on that we've already just talked about, that there could be a moment where he may decide to do, or he may end up doing something similar, which could really hurt his chances of getting on par with his teammate this weekend? Because right now he really needs to try and, in my opinion, I think that is something that is affecting him, the fact that Charles has started so well this season.
I think if you're looking from Carlos's perspective, there must be several things going through his mind. I think the first thing is, this guy is clearly a very talented F1 driver, but he's still yet to win a race. There's a lot of talk about, can't wait for Lando Norris to win his first race. It's crazy, he hasn't won a race. Carlos Sainz is definitely in that category. It's crazy when you think about the job that he's done, particularly for McLaren, and so far with so far for Ferrari, that he's still yet to win a race. So you've got that, and then when you add in the fact that he's driving for a team like Ferrari that pride themselves on having race-winning drivers, and he hasn't done that yet, that will be yet another thing that will come to mind. And the last thing will be Carlos Sainz is obviously seeing what the rest of us are seeing. Ferrari have a car that is more than capable at this stage of winning the world championship. So we could be going into a situation where if Carlos Sainz wants to win a world championship, his biggest rival is going to be his teammate. So he's going to have to start gaining the initiative. And if they start 1-2 on Sunday, don't be surprised to see him getting his elbows out, because we're only 4 races in, but Carlos Sainz needs to start establishing himself. Because let's say, hypothetically speaking, Red Bull or Mercedes somehow catch up. Ferrari will have to establish a number 1 driver, because they will be as hungry as anyone else to win both championships this season. So if that hypothetical situation occurs, Carlos Sainz has to be on a decent level with Charles Leclerc in order to get a look in, because this could well be Carlos Sainz's best ever opportunity, or only opportunity, to win a world championship.
Yeah, and a driver as talented as Sainz will obviously have to have in the back of his mind that Ferrari right now are going to be trying to maximise the amount of points that they can get whilst they're in such a strong position, because of course this can change very, very quickly. We could see Red Bull catch them. Mercedes may find that magic something that they often do to get themselves back in the game. And then all of a sudden Ferrari will be mulling over missed opportunities like what happened at Melbourne. As I said, I am strongly convinced that if Carlos had kept that out of the gravel at turn 10, he probably would have got on the podium, maybe more than that, given the pace of the car that he had underneath him that weekend. But just a quick one on the contracts situation. As we were saying, there's a bit of a stalemate from what we've been hearing going on between the two parties, where Carlos wants a 2-year contract confirmed, whereas Ferrari just want to give him the 1-year extension with an option for a 2nd year if they're happy in 2023. If you're Matteo Binotto or you're in charge of the contract negotiations with Ferrari, would you just give Sainz a 2-year deal, or do you feel that there is a logic to why they would want to only give him a 1 year plus an option to extend for a further one?
I find it bizarre that this situation is even happening, because if you're looking at from Ferrari's perspective, who could you really bring in that could do a better job at Ferrari right now than a Carlos Sainz? Because you've got that when you're at a big team like Ferrari, if you was to replace, I don't know, if you was to replace Carlos Sainz with a Max Verstappen, you know full well that kind of partnership isn't going to work. So somebody on Carlos Sainz's level that is actually capable of being a race winner, but clearly has a good relationship with his teammate, I think he offers everything that Ferrari need right now. And I do think he's been one of the reasons why Ferrari's performances improved, because we saw the exact same thing happen at McLaren. It's something that sometimes us as fans forget, that the drivers don't only offer raw racing ability, they play a big role in the development of their respective cars. And Carlos Sainz clearly does great jobs for the teams that he works for in that regard.
Yeah, very much so. I'm not sure what driver they might have in the back of their mind that they may want to wait to see what happens. I mean, the only one I can think of is Mick Schumacher, but he's nowhere near ready.
I've got a couple of outlandish ideas on that.
He may. Yeah, I mean, don't worry, I'll get to you in a second, but he may not be ready for a seat at Ferrari in his career. He may not be good enough. He has to prove himself this year against someone like Kevin Magnussen, which so far has proven to be more difficult than I think we anticipated. But I think it's a no-brainer. I think I can understand Ferrari's hesitation, but I think Carlos Sainz last season showed that he's more than capable of being in that Ferrari seat and getting the results that they need. So yeah, I would say just give him the 2-year deal, because look, if Mick Schumacher's still around in a few years' time and is developing at the required rate and shows that he's a match for Sainz, then yeah, okay, 2025, pull the trigger on it and get him in. But until then, don't be silly. You'd be an idiot to give up someone like Carlos Sainz at this point, even when you've got a Charles Leclerc in your team. And who's to say Ferrari are going to be on top in 2023 or 2024? They may not even be on top by the end of 2022. Or, hopefully they are, but we'll just have to wait and see. Lee, let's come to you on this one.
It's, as Courtney already said, Ferrari like having race winners, and Carlos hasn't had that yet. There is a certain Frenchman that is a race winner who may not get into the senior Red Bull team. So depending how the season goes, Ferrari may want to keep their options open for considering Carlos isn't performing enough. Let's go for Pierre, who constantly has been driving impressively as of late and still is. And he's a proven race winner. Don't forget. So and he beat Carlos for that race win.
Yeah.
He did, yeah.
So I think logically it makes sense for Ferrari to keep it delayed for now, in my opinion. But also I want to add in a very long curveball, which I doubt will ever happen, is Fernando has recently said this week that he is open to joining other teams if given the car. And if Ferrari somehow don't win this championship and Fernando's available, do they consider going back for Fernando to take them for that title fight if Charles isn't up to the task, so to speak?
A lot would have to happen for Fernando Alonso
I know, but
to be...
I mean,
the return to McLaren was something already, and that seemed unlikely. The return to Ferrari now, bear in mind, he's just gone past 40 now. I can't see that happening. I could imagine half the grid would have more of a chance of being in that Ferrari than Fernando Alonso. I'd be more... I think Lewis Hamilton joining Ferrari next season has more chance than Fernando Alonso going to Ferrari.
Still another option. He's not out of contract this year. Is he?
No, but I mean,
next year.
as I said, or even Max Verstappen, I think that has more chance with his bumper contract clauses aside. But a Gasly raises a very interesting one. Me personally, I can't see why Ferrari would swap Sainz for Gasly. As good as Gasly is, I think Sainz right now, despite not being a race winner, has proven that he's the more reliable driver in that regard. And Ferrari need that stability. They're not looking for a future number one. They're looking for a stable driver that's going to get results for them when they need him to. And so far, Sainz has done that superlatively. There's absolutely no reason why I don't think they should give him another 2-year contract. Courtney, Gasly or Sainz, what are your thoughts on that? Would you be tempted by Pierre Gasly, or do you think you'd be putting your eggs to make sure Sainz stays with the team for at least the medium term?
Yeah, as much as I like Pierre Gasly, I think Carlos Sainz is a perfect fit for Ferrari right now, and I think that'd be stupid to let him go.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get it. It makes sense, but I mean, if Leclerc left, then fair enough. But I don't know. I mean, if Leclerc left, I think they'd be looking at pretty much someone like Max Verstappen. Who knows? But anyway, look, I've seen strange things happen, but I think that one probably will get sorted at sooner rather than later. It's just how it goes sometimes. Anyway, look, let's move on to Red Bull. So we're not talking about Ferrari the whole episode. It's a rather simple one with Red Bull. They've got a quick car, as Christian Horner said it. He'd rather have a quick car that's unreliable than a reliable car that's slow in terms of fixing it. Not sure I'd agree, because of course you have to finish the race if you want to finish first, as they so often say. But Max Verstappen's problem is not necessarily just the speed of the car. It's the fact that every time he seems to want to push it, it just completely gives up on him. So if you're Max Verstappen this weekend, bearing in mind you're 46 points off the championship leader, you've been beaten by him at least twice so far, and on top of that, there's a huge opportunity for points this weekend. Does he have to go for it this weekend, or can he afford to be measured and potentially drop a few points if he has to? What are your thoughts on Max this weekend, and how do you think he's going to get on?
I think the Max Verstappen that we all know goes for any opportunities that he gets, and look, regardless of what some people feel about it, it's the reason why he's a world champion. He has that ruthlessness about him, so of course he will take any opportunity that comes his way. And I know he's had a lot of talk saying, this championship's already, going to be really difficult to claw back, but no way has that man given up on his championship. He will be going for it 100%. And and it's something that we loved about Max, particularly when he first came into the sport. He rubbed some of the old statesmen of the sport up the wrong way with some of the moves that he made. That's one of the reasons why he's so popular with some of the fan base. So I absolutely expect Max to be right in there. But you're right, Adam. I don't think he has the car this season to, for him to do exactly what he wants to do with that car. You're right. It seems that whenever he pushes it, the thing conks out. So it's going to be a weird one for Max this season, I feel.
Well, at least not yet. And Red Bull are trying to address that, particularly with weight reduction. That seems to be their biggest problem at the moment. And we had heard rumours that they were going to bring a huge weight reduction upgrade for this weekend's Grand Prix, which was going to save them about 8 kilograms. And for those of you that are wondering how much is that in lap time, that's around about 2.5 tenths of a second. If we're going by the fuel logic, in terms of 10 kilos of fuel is worth 3k. So it's around about 2.5 tenths of a second, which again, in qualifying trim, that will be enough to put Max on pole position. In the race, not so sure. But, you know, you raise a good point, Courtney. You're saying about Max being feisty as he was last season. This was the circuit last year where Max pulled off his first feisty-ish move on Lewis Hamilton in similar conditions where they sort of bumped wheels. So we may find that Max may have to take an opportunity if he gets into a position like that against possibly Charles Leclerc this weekend. Lee, what are your thoughts on Max this weekend? Do you feel that he has to respond now, or do you feel that he can take a more measured approach and see how things play out?
Well, I think I've already made it clear that Max is not going to take a measured approach. He's going to go for it. We're saying for Ferrari, Carlos needs to win this weekend. Max is another driver where he needs to win this weekend. He can't let Charles expand that already large gap any bigger. And I also raise that won't help him. But will we see a first clash in a car? Well, obviously in a car, they're going to be out of the car. Between Max and Charles, will they make contact? I think there's a chance that they could make contact because Max will go for it because he knows he will need to be ahead of Charles regardless, and he's live or let die. He will go for it. Sorry for the James Bond reference.
Well, no, I mean that's absolutely fine. I mean, this is the thing though, because we talked about, you know, a lot has been said so far about Charles and Max, and obviously they have a very good relationship, contrary to what a lot of people thought based on what we saw on social media so many times when they raced in karting, but it turns out they're actually very, very good friends. That all aside, we haven't really seen them lock horns in the way that Max did with Lewis last season. Now, we don't know if that's because Max has obviously taken a thorough review of how he drove last season and obviously wants to change that, or if he just feels right now that he's more comfortable racing against Leclerc compared to racing against Lewis. We have to wait and see, but you're rightly, there could come a point sooner rather than later where Max has to start really getting his elbows out and start asking the question of Leclerc, because right now we're picking drivers that need to win a Grand Prix this weekend. I think the only person that doesn't really need the win so much is Leclerc. So at the moment, it's kind of, you know, see and wait and see what happens.
I'll tell you what, guys, let's not forget about Sergio Perez. He has made a grand start in that car. You know, I was one of his critics last season. I was disappointed in how he started his Red Bull career. But if anything, I think at least 2 of those races, he looks more comfortable in that car than Max Verstappen did. So Perez could be in the mix. You know, he's very unlucky in Saudi Arabia. I think we often forget how unlucky he was. You know, he got pole position and the safety car wrecked his race. So Perez, we could have another situation where Perez could potentially out-qualify Max Verstappen. Let's not rule it out.
Well, that's the thing. Max has said that he's not enjoyed qualifying so far this season, and that was an area that he was very strong at last season against Lewis Hamilton. I think he got pole position more than anybody else last year. So it has proved to be rather important, and I think Perez has turned up in that regard. He's really improved his game. Perhaps this is a case that he's more comfortable with this new car compared to the one he had last season that was obviously more suited to Max's style than his own. So yeah, I think Perez could, despite what happened at Bahrain, he was very unlucky there, but he has performed relatively well and right now is leading the line for Red Bull. So what are we expecting from Perez this weekend, Lee? Do we think Perez has a realistic shot at winning this race, or do you think it could come down to Charles versus Max and Perez, like Sainz, could possibly look to try and complete that podium?
I think Courtney raised an important point about Sergio's performance in qualifying and how he's appeared to handle the car. So as much as I do think Max will be trying his best, I wouldn't be surprised to see Sergio ahead of him in qualifying. I mean, that may change come the sprint session, but at least from the Friday session, I think I would be surprised if Sergio's ahead. He just looks so much more comfortable in that car. He's driving a lot more smoothly, where Max just looks like he's fighting the car constantly. And some drivers win races fighting the car. That example was obviously Senna himself. But just in the modern day cars, you don't seem to be a race winner, championship winner when you're just fighting the car constantly throughout the weekend.
And he had a good qualifying session last season at Imola, Perez, but he was right at the front there with Max and Lewis, and everyone thought that, for Red Bull, that was good. But then he had a complete nightmare of a race. So he definitely needs to try and have a better one this weekend. And the way he's been driving, I can't see why not. Let's move on to Mercedes. Last time out, we saw reliability issues affect Red Bull. But that aside, Mercedes were just as good as Red Bull were bad in terms of pace. Mercedes got the setup right. They obviously paid a lot of attention in practice to trying to maximise what they had. And I think we can all agree that they very much did, with George Russell on the podium and Lewis in fourth. So we're coming into another weekend where Mercedes could potentially be playing damaged imitation. Are they fighting Red Bull again this weekend, or do you think it could go back to how it was in Jeddah, or perhaps Bahrain as a more accurate example? Courtney, what do you think about Mercedes' weekend this weekend? Do you think they could be on a podium?
I think Mercedes are probably one of the teams that have been the most excited about having a wet race. They've got two drivers that are both proven to be exceptional in wet conditions. Let's not forget about how well George did in qualifying in Spa. And we've seen many, many examples of Lewis being an exceptional driver in wet conditions. So if there's a team that could really benefit from a wet weekend, it certainly is Mercedes. But Mercedes really do need to start getting there in gear, because, as I said, we're kind of part of the season now where the races start coming thick and fast. And Mercedes need to start figuring out. I do believe deep down there is a car there that could definitely challenge at least Red Bull. But they need to unlock it soon, because at this stage, Ferrari are running away with it.
Well, it's almost role reversal, isn't it? Because last season at Imola, we learned that the Ferrari is actually quite handy in wet conditions, or at least it was in Charles Leclerc's hand, who, if it wasn't for the red flag that we saw last season, Charles Leclerc could have easily got P2 in that race. And of course, the conditions dried out. He fell down the order. Ferrari, granted, they did put the wrong tyre in his car. They should have put the softs. They ended up putting the mediums for some silly reason. And he fell down the order. But Mercedes, this season, porpoising and running the car too low has plagued them. Now that we may get some wet running, they're obviously going to have to run the cars a little bit higher. That may actually prove to be quite the benefit to them, Corny, as you mentioned, and it could prove that these conditions may actually suit them and bring them a lot closer to the likes of Ferrari and Red Bull than they have been in the first couple of races. Lee, what are your thoughts this weekend on Mercedes? Could those conditions come to Mercedes' advantage and perhaps put them in a position where they might be able to challenge for the win?
I was literally just about to bring that up, Adam. Another thing I do want to expand from your idea is obviously the porpoising happens at higher top speeds than when the airflow breaks. But apart from obviously running at a higher level in the car, in wet conditions, you don't have as higher top speeds. So therefore, you're less likely to have a large amount of porpoising due to the fact you're not going as fast. So there are several things that could potentially go in Mercedes' favour regarding their setup. Obviously, I don't expect Mercedes to go and win the race, although that would be interesting. I'm not going to lie. But I in the wet conditions, I expect them to be closer to Ferrari and Red Bull. Maybe enough to be annoying. That it messes with Ferrari's and Red Bull strategy. Maybe take the race to them. Never say never with Mercedes. The only question I would say is that obviously, what you said in the forecast of Saturday being dry, they could have a great Friday, they could have a great Sunday. Obviously, that's where you get the points, but their Saturday could be really horrible if it's dry conditions. So it's a really an interesting possibility of what Mercedes could do depending on the weather, and it just be great to see them there up and having a fight, even if it's just for one race.
Well, it's all about balance, isn't it? And
yep.
I think Mercedes are one of those teams that have got a really big decision to make, assuming that the weather forecast is accurate from what we've been saying and that it's going to be wet on Friday, wet on Sunday, but dry Saturday. Mercedes are in that kind of bind right now where they have to decide what is the priority for them. And if they decide to take a gamble and go for a more wet, favourable setup, which favours them on the Sunday and gives them a decent qualifying position on Friday, then they could be in a position where they could get some really, really big points. That being said, of course, they could also go the other way and try to maximise the sprint. It kind of depends on where they want to go. If it were me, I would probably favour the Sunday race because I think Mercedes are in a position right now in the Constructors' Championship where they're comfortably in second because of what's been going on with Red Bull, and they're quite some way off Ferrari, where they think, well, okay, we may not be able to catch and beat Ferrari this weekend, but we could certainly have a go at trying to beat Red Bull on merit again or get a podium if Red Bull are struggling this weekend like they did in Melbourne. So it's really interesting. And when you've got a driver like Lewis Hamilton, who's so good in the wet, there's only perhaps the likes of Schumacher and Senna that could hold a candle to Lewis in wet conditions in through F1 history. You've got that trump card there as well. And let's not forget, George Russell is no slouch in the wet conditions either. I mean, we saw that lap he did at Spa last season in the Williams getting it on the front row. So assuming George Russell doesn't have a race like he did last season where he crashed into Valtteri Bottas, and, you know, that could happen again, you know, given where they could be on track, there is a good opportunity for Mercedes this weekend to get some really, really big points. I genuinely feel that the conditions could favour them. So just a quick touch on George. Obviously, P2 in the championship right now. He's had a great start so far this season. Are we expecting George Russell to quickly become F1's Mr. Consistency right now? And are we expecting that again this weekend?
I am, and I'm not surprised to see him do so at Mercedes. I think it's been very frustrating for us as fans to see him stay at Williams for as long as he did, because we've seen a guy that, you know, did so well in F3, F2. We knew that he had the ability to be a top team. Unfortunately, the opportunity wasn't available, and it was as nice as it was to see him get those great moments with the Williams team. You want to be seeing the best drivers going for race win, battling with the very best. So I'm just really pleased that despite Mercedes' current problems, George Russell was in a position where he could hopefully be potentially competing with the likes of Charles Leclerc, competing with the likes of Max Verstappen in the future, because I do think he's in that caliber. You know, I don't want to get too carried away. If he continues to settle in the way he is at Mercedes, you know, once Lewis has gone, I do feel that George Russell's going to be the main guy flying the British flag. And he's going to be the guy that's going to be challenging the likes of Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc. Obviously, there are other guys that are going to be coming through. Let's not forget Lando Norris as well. But George Russell is going to be, I do think he's going to be one of the guys that should really define this next generation of drivers.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. Lee, any thoughts on George Russell this weekend? What are you expecting from him?
Well, I think you summed it up with the new Mr. Consistent. I think George is going to obviously be very close to Lewis in level performance. They're going to be nip and tuck between them, between who's the fastest in qualifying, who's going to be ahead in the track. They're going to be like a married couple going around the track together is what I think I'm going to see this weekend. They're going to be fifth or sixth, third or fourth, first or second even. They're just going to be bang next to each other on the track the entire weekend. That's what I'm expecting from George this weekend. And obviously Lewis. I think they're the close match performance and drivers of any of them on the grid at the moment.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the biggest compliment you can pay to George Russell right now, is that even though Lewis was very unfortunate with the safety car, what George did in Jeddah, how close he was to Lewis in Bahrain, and obviously that is improving, he is very much becoming more familiar with this car. Not that we were surprised by that, and he does seem to be very close to Lewis on ultimate pace, which is a great thing for a young man who's not even 25 yet, you know, and doing a great job at Mercedes. So yeah, it certainly bodes well for the future for George Russell. I was just thinking of a good new nickname for George Russell. How about Consistent George rather than Curious George? Does that one sound? Yeah, why not? Let's go with call him Consistent George. I like that. We say that, and then he's probably going to do what he did last year and hit Bottas again.
Don't say that.
No, don't say that. No.
And yeah, hopefully there's not a repeat of that, because that wasn't a pleasant incident at all for either driver. Certainly wasn't for Mercedes when they come up with the bill to fix that. And in a cost cap era, that's obviously a big thing. Let's move on to McLaren before we cover the rest of the midfield. McLaren had a very good weekend. 5th and 6th for Norris and Ricciardo, respectively, at Melbourne. By far better than what they would have predicted, or anyone would have predicted. And unless your name's Ben Hunt, and you were on the podcast the other week saying that they were going to get a double points finish. So, yeah, Mystic Ben on that one. But what are we expecting this weekend from McLaren? Are we expecting a similar performance from them, or do we think McLaren might fall back onto the fringes of the top 10 as we've seen so far this season? Courtney, what do you think? McLaren went strong here last year. Could they repeat that, or do you think they may fall back in the midfield?
You know what? I know, like, the whole point of this preview is to make bold predictions, but with McLaren, who knows? I think McLaren have been a sort of an enigma team this season. The performances are sort of here, there, everywhere. Maybe they're figuring things out about the car. The way that the fans hoping Mercedes will. Maybe McLaren are doing the same thing because they were so good in testing and they just fell off. Well, they were good in Barcelona. So maybe it is. Lee touched on it very much earlier on in the episode about McLaren's braking issues. Maybe it is temperature related. So maybe this McLaren runs a lot better in colder conditions. Because if you have a look at the contrast between Barcelona and the Bahrain test, it was night and day. So maybe in these kind of conditions, maybe McLaren will be in a much better position. I think Dan Ricciardo's taken a step in the right direction as well. So as a pairing, I think they've got two competent drivers. So yeah, if they continue the way they were in Melbourne, they'll be in a stronger position once more.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I hope that turns out to be the case. I feel like this track may not necessarily favour McLaren. It may be similar to what we saw in Bahrain, although not as bad, because, that was terrible for them. So we'll have to wait and see, particularly in the middle sector and final sector where there are a few slower corners. Hopefully that's not the case. So I think on the fringes of the top 10 is probably more realistic. But what are your thoughts on McLaren this weekend, Lee? Do you think it's going to be like I've mentioned, or do you think it's going to be a bit more positive that Courtney has mentioned?
I think it's going to be a bit more towards Courtney's mentioned, I'm afraid.
Oh no, don't have to apologise for that.
No, I'm just being polite.
I'm usually McLaren fans will probably hate me on this pod by now, but I'm usually the negative Nelly when it comes to stuff like that. So you go with your positivity, Lee. You don't let me tell you otherwise.
Oh, thank you. No, with the McLaren, obviously there's more issues than just the brakes, but one of the big issues that McLaren reported was the overheating of the brakes. Obviously, they've had their plan. They're working on it. Andrea Seidel has said they've got a clear plan of development for McLaren, which is good to have a clear plan of development.
Exactly.
Mercedes don't have a clear plan of development at the moment. So it's good that they've got a clear plan. They know what the issue is. They know what they need to do to fix it. And they go from point A to point B to C, D, so on. So how far they're on their plan, we don't know. But if overheating, air temperature-wise, it's definitely cooler in Italy. We don't know how the wet conditions will affect any of the cars, so you can't predict that at all. But I think we'll see them in both cars in the top 10, or at least fighting for the top 10. So I fully expect them to be in the fight in the midfield.
Yeah, that is certainly a fair assessment. As I said, I think that, I hope that McLaren do better than I think they will do this weekend. We'll just have to wait and see. Again, a new circuit. It's very easy to get a bit carried away with what happened in Melbourne as a reflection of their true performance. But then, of course, they did really, really well. So maybe they have made a step forward or understood their car to the point where they can operate it under this window. So, yeah, may that continue for them. So let's move on to the midfield now. Or more in depth with the midfield. We've got Alpine, Alfa Romeo, Aston Martin, Williams, and Haas that we haven't yet covered. And I want to kind of do that in a bit of a cluster because I'm aware of the time at the moment. We're nearly up to an hour already. Alpine, again, they're just going about their business, but they were very unfortunate last weekend. Ocon did a good job to get some solid points. Fernando, it could have been so much more for him if qualifying had worked out and if the race strategy had sort of come to him because the safety cars really didn't help him at all. So, Alpine, just a quick one on this one, guys. Are we expecting them to be possibly Mercedes' biggest challengers alongside McLaren, or do you think that they may, again, be another team on the fringes in that midfield battle? Just a quick word on those, guys. What do you think for Alpine this weekend?
Yeah, I reckon fourth best and could well be a challenge to Mercedes, which I'm sure Fernando Alonso would absolutely love.
Well, he's shown in qualifying he's been quite a bit of a star, so could we see potential more heroics from Alonso in qualifying this weekend? Bear in mind, we've got a sprint weekend, and we know how much he loves those because he doesn't like to sit around and do nothing.
That's the thing. He will relish the chance to be, coming up against somebody like Lewis Hamilton. So he will be. We're talking about Max going for it. I think Alonso will definitely be going for it as well.
And Lee, what are your thoughts on Alpine this weekend? Perhaps a word on Ocon as well, because it's quite easy to talk about Alonso and forgetting that he has a teammate that's still, picking up the points.
Alpine, I probably agree with Courtney's sentiments that fourth best team potentially fighting McLaren and Mercedes, depending on Mercedes' performance. They've been consistently up there in speed. They haven't yo-yoed it on the circuit specific. Unfortunately, that could have been better. And I think that's something that both drivers and the team operation need to operate on, of get rid of that could have been better and, that was better. Get rid of that could, make it better. And I think that's their problem that's holding them back. So I'd love to see them eliminate that could out of that sentence.
And just a quick word on Ocon, because he's currently leading the championship if you remove the Ferraris, the Red Bulls and the Mercedes. So he's just quietly going about his business whilst Alonso's either up or down at the moment. So what do you think he's going to do this weekend?
Well, yeah, I think he would do another solid performance, which Esteban is very good at delivering out the car at the moment. He may not get the attention that Fernando does, but he's delivering the job for Alpine. And there's obviously been he's proven that he's come back last year, he's recovered, but it's that 1 year gap, what 1 year gap? Esteban's there.
Yeah, very much so. Haas, are they going to be good or bad this weekend? Because they were strong the first couple of races, surprisingly off the pace in Melbourne. Gunther Steiner said they just couldn't get the setup right on their car and it really cost them. And do you think they're going to put that right this weekend?
Yeah, I think they will. I think they've got the car there. They just need a little bit more fortune, I feel. I think Mick Schumacher needs to up his game, because the first time I've said that, actually, I've been very pro Mick Schumacher, still am, but the fact that Kevin Magnussen's come back and he's been the main protagonist that Haas. If Mick Schumacher has this dream of driving for Ferrari, he needs to be beating his teammates. So I think in terms of Haas, I think all eyes are they're all going to start going on to Mick Schumacher, because we're waiting for that moment from Mick, and it has to come pretty soon.
He's been on the cusp of it. He's just been unlucky a few times this season so far. But you're right, Courtney. He does need to up his game. Do we see points this weekend? Perhaps for Mick Schumacher, is this the week that he could do it?
Yeah, I can't see why not. But he's going to have to beat his teammate, I feel, because I feel that Haas will be on the cusp of the points. But he has to get the better of Kevin Magnussen this weekend, I feel.
Yep, very much so. Lee, quick word on Haas. What are you expecting from them this weekend?
Completely agree. Corny sentiment there. I reckon they're going to their setup. They'll be fighting bottom end of the points, just outside the points, and I fully expect a close battle between Kevin and Mick. I mean, Kevin has taken it, the Mick being a year out of the sport, and it's probably not gone how Mick thought it would have gone so far this season. So yeah, as you both mentioned, he needs to pick his game up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are we going to get Kevin at Ferrari in the future?
Well, that's got more chance than Alonso at this rate. Moving on to Alfa Romeo, Bottas and Zhou Guanyu. Again, another team which has got a clear number one and number two. Bottas was a less than savoury weekend at Melbourne. Although that being said, he still managed to pick up a P8. So his race pace is clearly there. So is he going to be the dark horse to watch out for, Valtteri Bottas, this weekend?
Could well be. I think he seems to be a lot more comfortable with that. Is this contract am I going to lose my seat at the end of the season? Mindset he's had to deal with over the last 3-4 seasons. So he's in a good place. So, we're going into a wet race. If there's going to be a sort of a surprise result, I think Valtteri Bottas could be the guy to deliver that.
I agree. I think so too. And I think, Zhou will be up there again. Whether he gets in the points or not, we'll have to wait and see. Lee, what are your thoughts on Alfa Romeo this weekend? Bottas dark horse, maybe Zhou in the points, or perhaps they might fall back a bit. Where do you reckon that will go with them?
I definitely agree with the sentiment about Valtteri being the dark horse. If any driver is going to take a gamble on setup or take a gamble on strategy, Valtteri's going to be one of those top 3 drivers that I would say is going to take that gamble to do it. He's got the skills and the knowledge to pull it off. Obviously, if it works, it's a different matter. But he'll be up there. Zhou, on the other hand, his first wet race in the Formula 1 car. If the forecast is correct, I expect him to fall back just because the lack of experience at these kinds of speeds in the Formula 1 car. Obviously, I know he's had others driving the other formulas, but it takes time to learn to master the car in the dry. You let it do it in the wet as well. changeable conditions. So I expect him to fall back, especially if it starts drying out and getting wet again. Yeah, I don't think he's going to have a very enjoyable race.
Yeah, very much so. AlphaTauri, Gasly and Tsunoda. Gasly, I think we can all agree that, this weekend we'll probably expect him to be on the fringes, if not in Q3, and perhaps because it's a sprint weekend, we might see him take an opportunity or take a risk. So on home soil, that might work out for AlphaTauri. But Yuki Tsunoda, I want to talk about him briefly. He's not had a lot of luck with reliability. His race pace sort of fell away after a decent qualifying a few times this season. So what are we thinking for Tsunoda? Is he already under pressure, or do we feel that he's just going to have to go about his business and hope that results pick up? Because it's hard to call with him right now, because he looked like he might be better in Bahrain, but since then it's through reliability or just poor performance. It's not really been a good way to really measure that.
He is under pressure, but I feel that the situation with the Red Bull powertrains could be an interesting one, because with the reliability issues that Red Bull have had, there's clearly going to have to be more dialogue between Red Bull and Honda. And that could play into Yuki Tsunoda's hands, because if Red Bull want to be sort of be in Honda's good books with developing not only a good engine but a reliable one, keeping Yuki Tsunoda in the Red Bull program could be a factor. But you're right, I think he has been unlucky. But I just feel that circumstances both on track and off track could end up benefiting Yuki.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see how that goes. Lee, any thoughts on AlphaTauri's weekend this weekend?
No, I think you both touched on exactly my thoughts regarding Pierre and Yuki. I don't think they're going to be in the point scoring positions, though, unfortunately.
No.
Yeah, I mean, someone's got to finish outside the points, because right now we've said pretty much everybody but them are going to be in the points, so it's very stacked this weekend. Let's move on to Williams. Latifi and Albon. I mean, what can we say about Latifi? He's either going to finish or end up in the wall. So, what do we reckon, guys?
Oh, no.
I definitely said Latifi's going to end up in the wall.
Yeah.
It's a wet track. He's a spin-off.
Well, I mean, wasn't it last year or the year before that he did it? Or did he do it both years at Imola?
Probably both.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think I'm just trying to think did he do it early in the... I'm trying to think. It must have been 2019 or 2020, sorry. He was like the first retirement in that race. Yeah. So for some reason I was thinking of an image where Lewis was on the gravel before the red flag came out, and then Latifi just happened to be there, but I don't think he was. That might just be my imagination imagining that just for the meme content. But let's move on to Albon. We should say we do like Latifi, but what more can we say that we haven't already said? Albon, the hero.
He's done well.
Yeah, the hero last weekend proved to do a remarkable job, stopping on the final lap, and then, or the lap before, I should say, and then going on to get those championship points. Are we expecting anything heroic? I mean, it could happen again. Changeable conditions. Creates all those kind of variable situations, and you might be able to put something together this weekend as well.
He might be able to, but that Williams has been disappointing. I did expect more from Williams. I must say, I thought, the position that team is in right now, they really needed to get this season right. I hope they can turn it around. Albon is the driver that will be. They're gonna be reliant on Albon again. I don't want to be too harsh on Latifi, but it hasn't been good enough. Williams will definitely be relying on Albon, and the guy can do it. He's very, very unlucky at Red Bull, I feel. Coming into a team, teammate like Max Verstappen would be easy for anybody. So Alex Albon will be the guy to pick up those very few chances that Williams will be getting this season.
And Lee, what do you think about Williams this weekend? Do you think that Albon can repeat his heroics, or is it going to be more of the status quo from what we've seen this season, where Williams just don't have the pace right now?
I think it's been more the status quo, although wet races are so unpredictable. If it is going to be a wet race, that you never could say never. With Alex ending up in the points, you may get 6 cars crashing out, and then Alex will find himself in P8 going, "Oh, how did I get here?" Obviously, one of those cars would be Latifi, so it doesn't always.
Well, this is it. We might see another. What was it? What did they call it? And in Singapore, 2008, trying to remember what scandal it was called. I can't remember the name.
When Piquet. Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to. I can't forget what it was called now.
Wasn't it
Yeah,
Crashgate?
There we
Yeah,
go,
it's very
Crashgate. Yes,
Crashgate.
that's right. Nelson Piquet Jr. bidding it deliberately under instruction from Flavio Briatore, and allowing his teammate to get the free pit stop to win the Grand Prix that weekend. I mean, that would take some doing if Latifi did something similar, and then Alex Albon managed to benefit and then win the Grand Prix. I mean, that would be pretty special. I think what that would require, if it was a dry race on Sunday, is if Albon doesn't pit, somehow manages to be ahead of whoever's at the front, keep them behind him, and then just one lap before the end, Latifi bins it in the wall. There's a red flag. And if they had to do the last lap, Albon just puts on a set of soft tyres and manages to get the free pit stop there.
don't rule it out.
Too imaginative.
Jesus. It's the thing is though, like obviously don't want to make it sound like winners have been dodgy, but it's a scenario that I can see happening by accident.
Yeah,
I think that's
is Latifi good enough to do that deliberately? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And we are nicer to him on previous episodes, but I think a lot of people have been saying this, that with all due respect to someone like Nicholas Latifi, you know, he's a solid driver, but when you make those mistakes so often as you do, and they are rookie errors by someone of his standard, you do have to question if he is capable of being in Formula One. And I had a discussion with Spanners about this, you know, buy-in drivers that he preferred to call it, trademark Mr. Apex, just in case he listens. And he basically said that these, you know, there's a difference between paid drivers, like everyone's a paid driver, or buy-in driver, and it's a case of, are you there on your merits, and they're buying how the driver you are, or you're buying your way in. And in Latifi's case, you know, buying his way in, and he's had time, he's had a few years, he's had a solid junior career, but when it comes to making that step up to F1, it's just not been good enough. And I often wonder how much of a price do Williams have to pay in terms of repairing all the damage that's affecting the development and everything else. It's all fine having that, you know, having that money, that revenue coming in from a driver, but if you're not able to use it because you're busy fixing the car rather than developing it, there does cut to a point where you just feel, you know what, maybe we just need to take that loss, get a sponsor in to replace him, and just bring in a more capable driver.
Yeah, it is it's a real difficult one, and F1 seats are so difficult for, you know, the younger drivers to get into, and I would prefer to see you know, one of the drivers from F2 come through, replace Latifi, to be honest. I think Latifi's had his chance, he just hasn't done enough.
When they have a perfectly capable one sitting on the Alpine pit garage every weekend, just twiddling his thumbs, get him in there. Aston Martin, I do want to talk a little bit about them before we round this off, because they're in a bit of a catch-22 right now. No matter what they've tried, they just can't seem to make a way forward. Obviously, a lot of investment has gone into that through this Lawrence Stroll project, and I'm sure he's starting to feel the burden of it, trying to think, why is it not going anywhere? They've brought a lot of new people in. The car right now doesn't seem to be very good, and neither their drivers seem to be on form either. I mean, Lance Stroll, again, a solid driver, has you know, better driving than Latifi, obviously, but just not able to really deliver, and perhaps a lot of that is down to the car on a consistent basis. And then we've got Sebastian Vettel, who's obviously was out with COVID for the first two races. He comes in Australia and does I think, combined amount of 40-odd laps, which involved a breakdown, 2 crashes, and it does make you wonder where Aston Martin are going to find results, because I could very easily see, unless something significant happens to improve, that they could end up finishing last in this Constructors' Championship. I think there's a realistic possibility of that, because right now they need a driver to do something special, and I don't know if Sebastian's got that in him anymore. And I really hate saying that. I love the guy, I hate saying that, but I'm just worried that perhaps that fire, that desire that he once had is now nothing more than just the smallest of embers that is waiting to die out in tandem with his F1 career. Depressing, I know, and I'm sorry to bring the mood down, but Lee, seeing as you're Mr. Positive on this podcast compared to me, can you shed some light perhaps to see if Aston can salvage something this weekend, and by extension perhaps this season?
And the only positive thing I can think of is it's potentially be a wet session, and Sebastian is being quite handy in the wet in the past. if he's still capable of doing so, that's another discussion. But if anyone's going to pull that Aston Martin anywhere, it's going to be Sebastian. Just hope he's up to the caliber and he's all full health and he has no long COVID and any of that side effects that can happen. But I unfortunately do agree with you that I think Aston Martin are going to finish one place in this championship.
Yeah, unless something crazy happens. And of course, we should never rule it out. No. But right now, the car is just nowhere near good enough. And it's difficult enough to drive, let alone at the moment with how Stroll is inconsistent and Vettel right now. Again, look, we have to stress that there's been one race and he's been out with COVID and he looked okay in testing, it must be said. So maybe we'll see a better Vettel now that the cobwebs have been shaken off and he's feeling a bit better health-wise. We'll have to wait and see. Courtney, what are you expecting for Aston Martin? Can Vettel or even Stroll do something to try and pick up some points this week? I mean, there's a lot on offer if the opportunity rises.
But they're not in a good position at all. I feel there's a little bit of an identity crisis, I'm saying, Aston Martin at the moment. I look at every other team and I look at least one of those drivers that have that spark in them to capitalise on a race winning or a point scoring opportunity. And you're right. I hope with Sebastian Vettel it is COVID related. But right now, in terms of like the driver pairings, I think right now, in terms of current performance, they have the weakest driver pairing. So that and the performance of the car, it isn't great. But look, it's early on in the season. A lot can change. And if anyone's gonna pick something up for Aston Martin this season, it will be Sebastian Vettel.
I certainly hope so. I'm worried consciously that Sebastian Vettel, because of how things are with him in terms of what he wants from Formula One or what Formula One can give him, I just worry that this could be his last season. And look, I don't want him to stick around if he's not happy and he's not enjoying himself. And it does show in his driving. When the man is happy, he's on top form and he's feeling good, he's as good as anybody out there. But those weekends are getting fewer and further between all the time. I wonder if we may hear an announcement at some point in the maybe not the next few races, but we may get to a point in the season earlier than we'd probably like where we may hear Seb say, you know what, it's been fun, but I want to look at other things really. And maybe Aston Martin might try and nudge him in that direction, because right now they probably need 2 new drivers in that car and they're probably only going to get one, and it's not going to be Lance. So what do you guys think? Could this be curtains on Seb's career? I'm sorry to say
it could be. Yeah, it'd be a shame because we know how good the guy can be, but it does seem like right now that something's missing. Maybe his mind is elsewhere.
Lee, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I unfortunately think this could be his last season. Seb has made it very clear in the past that he does want to be in the sport to make up numbers. He wants to be there fighting for wins and championships. Unfortunately, how it looks at the moment, the Aston Martin plan isn't going to plan. Obviously, Lawrence has learned that throwing money in Formula One doesn't always fix things. There are other things to consider when running a team. And as you said, one driver is not going to go anywhere. I think it's just Sebastian he will have enough of finishing towards the back of the grid and be like, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm a 4-time world champion. I'm not here going to run around in 18th or 19th.
Well, this is probably why I don't feel happy about seeing him so far down the order. You know, it's not. I can get it with someone like Kimi. Kimi was fine to just do it for fun, and everyone loved Kimi for that, for the meme content and everything else. But for someone like Seb, you don't really want to remember that. You want to remember the times when he's fighting for championships. I mean, he's not been in a championship-winning car since 2018, or at least one that was capable of fighting for one. And his performances, by contrary, have not really been able to match that either. So, yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. But right now, it's not looking good for them. We're running this episode off as we normally do with our predictions. So we're going to ask for... I'm going to ask for your top 3 in the main race. And I'm going to ask you for... Should I go for... No, I'm going to ask you for your sprint race winner this weekend. And I'm also going to ask for your top 3 in the main race. And then a bold prediction as well. So, Courtney, where are we going this weekend with your predictions?
So, sprint race winner is going to be Charles Leclerc. Okay, and the bold prediction is going to be in my top 3, given the conditions that we're going to have. So I reckon we're going to have. I reckon Max Verstappen 3rd, Charles Leclerc 2nd. I'm going to say George Russell is going to do a wet weather masterclass and get his first F1 win.
Well. That would be something. That would be something indeed. So, Lee, have you got anything that can top that one?
I'm not sure. It's quite a bold prediction. I would have said for the sprint, Charles will get that. However, I think Carlos will win the race, followed by Sergio, followed by Lewis. And that's because of my bold prediction. Max and Charles will make contact.
Oh, I had a funny feeling because I was thinking, what happened to Leclerc? What happened to him? But there you go. Yeah, maybe. Okay, I like that. And I did ask you to raise, and you certainly did. So I'm going to be more boring, seeing as that's normally my role on this show. Leclerc, I think he's going to win the sprint. I think he's also going to win the main race. I think he's going to have another strong weekend. I think my bold prediction will be another Ferrari 1-2. And I think that they will be followed by Max Verstappen in P3. Sorry, guys, I can't be exciting. I mean, you've got Courtney's and Lee's predictions. You're not going to get greedy and expect me to up them as well. But look, as always, guys, I hope you enjoyed that show. It was a bit on the lengthy side, but of course we had to talk about the sprint as well. So thanks for bearing with us on that one. But as always, if you enjoyed the content and the episode in particular, make sure to give us a like on YouTube. It really helps us out a lot. Consider subscribing to the channel, and also if you enjoyed the episode, make sure to follow us on your favorite podcasting platform. If you give us a 5-star review, we will reward you by giving you a shout out on the next episode. But until next time, guys, please stay safe. Thanks so much for tuning in. Enjoy the Grand Prix this weekend, and we'll see you on the next episode. Actually, no, wait 1 second, because I haven't told you that we're doing our watch along this weekend. I almost forgot. Just a quick plug. Doing the watch along of sprint qualifying. That's going to be live on the YouTube channel. Just open DNF1, and you'll be able to see me and maybe another guest as well react to qualifying live at 4 o'clock on Friday UK time. So yeah, make sure to join us along for that one. That all aside, plugging out of the way. See you later, guys. Join in for the next episode of the podcast. We will see you there. Take care.
See you soon.
Goodbye.
Recording stopped.
We're done.